All right, everybody. Welcome to the Behind the Strategy Scaling AI Search Optimization with our guest, Jules Davies from Scalerrs. As you guys know, my name is Nathan. I'm the growth marketing lead here at Promptwatch. And I met Jules a few months ago. He reached out with a couple feature requests for the Promptwatch platform. And then ever since then, I knew that this guy had a pretty good hold on what was going on with the AI search market. And just talking with him quite a bit, I really wanted to be able to get him on a show like this so he could share some of the knowledge that he has. As I mentioned on LinkedIn, and if any of you got the email, he shares quite a few good AI search tidbits on LinkedIn, a lot of good customer success stories. So you can rest assured that he's doing the right things. But I won't try to introduce you anymore, Jules. You can introduce yourself, and then I heard you got a little bit of a presentation prepared for us.
Definitely. Well, first of all, Nathan, thanks a lot for having me on. Very happy to share a few ideas in terms of AI search, because that is indeed what we do day in and day out. So, a quick presentation. I'm English. I'm from France. I run Scalerrs, so scalers.co with double R and not .com, but we're an agency. We work with just SaaS companies, mainly B2B, and we only work on organic front, which means that we've had to shift a lot of our playbooks in terms of AI search. So today, the deck which we're going to go through in terms of a few ideas is going to be learnings directly, which we do across probably 35 plus companies day in, day out. So we definitely have a chance to send over to the Promptwatch team quite a few feature requests, because it's definitely an evolving space, and we're happy to share a few ideas.
Cool.
All right, awesome. Do I dive in that case, Nathan, and share my screen?
Yeah, please, just go ahead.
All right, awesome, perfect. All right, let's do it. So the format for today then is going to be Nathan has shared across some questions which he think would be valuable, and I basically put together a few decks in terms of how we could basically answer these questions and go basically about it, in other words. So one of the first questions is, what has basically changed for AI search, basically, or like, why is AI search in the first place an interesting channel, and why should more companies be paying attention to it? So obviously our customer base is SaaS focused, so probably like a few other SaaS companies here are going to probably be able to identify themselves here, and it's going to feel familiar. But we've definitely seen that, like, if you put AI search into the same buckets of like organic, or maybe you want to separate out those buckets like Google, etc. But the AI search side, in terms of like ChatGPT, Claude, AI mode, etc., giving referrals in terms of like signups, is actually a very strong, basically, part of the pipeline of most of our customers, and it's becoming increasingly important. I would say at the very top end, we've even seen like 50% of pipeline come from AI search and just like Google. So that really is a large amount. And yeah, so this is basically growing. It's a growing trend. I would say there's also a few other channels in the mix here, such as like Reddit, for example, was not really present before as a source, but for certain verticals of customers, it definitely basically is becoming a source of signups, basically. So this is very interesting. That just basically goes to show that having forgetting about this channel is really not the way of going about it. You really need to say to yourself, okay, this channel is growing. How can we basically start getting onto it, and what should we do differently? Okay, so for a bit of context, for example, Morgan, actually a B2C SaaS, they've actually got, for example, like I'd say it's about 35% of their pipeline in terms of like leads new coming in is actually AI search. So let's talk about how to get there. So one question Nathan had is like, okay, what's changed in AI search over the last 2 years? So obviously, people would have a few different takes in terms of saying like, okay, well, we'd say like AI search has changed quite a bit. I would say that while it definitely has evolved, there's been a few different things kind of happening. I've always had the same take since we've had to like adapt our playbooks. So basically, AI search is multi-channel, and we're going to talk about that today. And tools like Promptwatch really help you understand that there is basically a multi-channel approach in the back end, which is actually fueling your prompts. And that's why the narrative around like, SEO is AI search, and that's the only thing which really matters, is kind of not relevant. It's definitely a part of the puzzle, which we're going to talk about after, but it's only a part of the puzzle. So I would say that my perspective is AI search has been relatively stable in the sense of like the dynamic from the get-go is that it pulls from multiple sources. But I would say some interesting trends, for example, one which we've recently seen inside Promptwatch, and probably more people have heard about on LinkedIn as well, but LinkedIn Pulse articles, for example, are rising as a citation source. So that's an interesting trend, I would say. And we've also seen, I would probably say YouTube, for example, was also rising last year, and it's still rising today in terms of like you're seeing it pulled through a lot more heavily, especially on the Google front. We could talk about why, but the simple answer why is because it's the same company, YouTube and Google, so they share the data. And I would also say that maybe recently as well, there was, I mean, it went pretty viral on LinkedIn as well, but Reddit has been rising once again in ChatGPT as a stronger source, basically because OpenAI and Reddit strengthened their partnership. But this is one takeaway in terms of like LinkedIn posts basically is on the rise. Reddit recently is on the rise of ChatGPT again, and YouTube is becoming more and more prominent inside the Google AI overviews, etc. So these are some interesting insights here, but I would say as a whole, it's always been multi-channel, and that's the core DNA and like of the AI search to keep in mind. So let's talk about a few ideas. Well, quite a few brands these days, I would say, are getting wrong about AI search. So the first thing I would say, it comes from the understanding of like, okay, what are we actually trying to aim for? And like, what's the difference between AI search and organic to date? So, I mean, at the end of the day, large language models, all they're trying to do is they're trying to not get the answer wrong, right? It's as simple as that. They can't do all the research for someone. They want to basically go and get the hard done research by other people and then go and get that information across as many sources of content and domains. Those domains and entities are basically weighted in terms of how much they trust them. And then after it's a question of like, okay, well, who's being talked about the most? And that basically comes down to consensus in terms of saying, hey, this brand here being talked about multiple times, which means if I give that back to the user, well, there's a very lower chance at least that I get my answer wrong. And the next part is context in terms of saying like, hey, okay, these brands are being mentioned. Apparently, these brands here are strong for specifically these use cases, specifically these industries. Maybe you've got your competitors mentioned aside, but there's context basically in terms of like, okay, what you're good for and what you're not good for. So, tools like Promptwatch, for example, help you understand the sentiment. And that's basically this new metric, which is also something to analyze and to understand is like, okay, what's the sentiment of how we're being talked about, So we have, for example, some customers who come to us because maybe they've grown, they've scaled really rapidly, and their customer support just wasn't following up with tickets and requests. And it's like, well, we actually pretty well known right now of being a company with not very good customer support. Well, maybe that's, for example, a sentiment and context which you need to fix. Or maybe, for example, it's a positioning in terms of like you've grown as a company and the market has known you for being a very good fit for mid-market and maybe SMBs, but now actually you've outgrown that customer base. But AI and LMMs, they know you as being a very good fit for mid-market and SMBs, but actually now your focus is enterprise. So that's a question of context in terms of like basically these large language models need to understand how basically you want to be represented and how you want to actually appear inside different prompts. So understanding basically these two concepts here, I would say is really key and really important. So let's move on to the next one. So the next thing is here is this question of like SEO is just basically AI search. Okay. So while I fundamentally agree with the idea there's an overlap, I also fundamentally disagree, but it's the whole picture. And I think that's I think SEOs just by nature of just who they are as individuals, usually they're kind of like, stay pretty strong on their own channel. And it's like, oh, this is my beliefs, etc. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you just got to look at the bigger picture. Like the answers are pretty much in front of your eyes. You open up a tool like Promptwatch, you look at citations. Sure, there are indeed SEO pages, but there are also Reddit results, there are YouTube videos, there's J2, there's Wikipedia, and all of this is going to vary basically depending on the large language model in front of you. And as much as I'm aware, I don't believe that SEOs were focusing on Reddit. I don't believe SEOs were focusing on YouTube, or for example, being much more aware of their J2 campaign, etc. So this is basically this shift basically in dynamic. And it's also I think for anybody in the audience here which hasn't yet launched their organic channel, it's also a shift of mind. And it's a little bit worrying for newer brands because there's so much to be done in hindsight to win on AI search compared to winning on Google. To win on Google is pretty simple. To a certain degree, it's like, it's content, topical authority, links, you get one page to perform. But for AI search, you need to have so much coverage basically across multiple sources. And there's no single one here, which is a silver bullet to say, basically. And that's the hard real thing. So this is the next shift in mindset, is basically brands not understanding, but basically it's a multi-channel approach. And we're going to use a brand which we work with just after, how we run this multi-channel approach. And you're going to see exactly how we've done that and how that basically fuels in. But that's the first thing to do. And if you put up Promptwatch, you put up citations, you can see that yourself directly. It's very simple. The next thing then, so here's a customer example I was just talking about. But for example, we attack it from two parts of the coin. So as much as here on this webinar for AI search, when we think about Google as well, the Google SERP is pretty fragmented in terms of like, there's different types of content sources showing on Google. There's Reddit results, there's SEO results, there's J2, there's YouTube. Like there's a lot of different sources there capturing up that attention. And often if you look at the AI overview, which we're here for today in terms of how to get inside that AI answer, you'll often see that those same different types of sources of content ranking on page one are also the ones feeding context and basically fueling that answer, both in terms of consensus and also in terms of context. So that means that from that perspective there, if you cared about the AI search for Google, first of all, you'd cover those multiple sources of content. And then secondly as well, if you want to capture more eyeballs on Google, which there still definitely is, you would actually focus on different channels because you would capture those eyeballs at different levels and just own more SERP real estate if you want to. Okay, so that's for Google. But then after, if you look at AI search and you pull up any type of model like ChatGPT, you pull up just other models, you'll see that if you look inside the sources, you'll see very similar content sources, such as the Reddit threads. You'll see a very strong correlation with the Reddit threads, the SEO results, maybe in the YouTube videos, but you can see there's like a very strong correlation across all these sources. So that's personally how we tackle it. So for this customer here, Morgan, we basically, for a keyword of theirs, sun summer alternative, it's a competitor. We basically target that Reddit thread. We get their SEO page to perform. And then after part of that, there's also a YouTube video a bit further down here. All that information fuels after the AI search box, basically. And as you can see them there, and that feeds through the context. So this is how it is to go about it, in other words. So we're going to talk about a few traps then to avoid when potentially starting out. So one of them, for me, it's actually interesting. You guys did a post on this today, actually, Nathan, which I found was very interesting about, basically having quite a bit of content. So this is interesting because it is true. But like, if you actually put out quite a bit of content, LMMs are a little bit different to Google in terms of how they work. Like they can read multiple pages on the same intent. They're going to be happy to kind of pick up that context. And I think quite a few brands basically have sensed themselves like, oh, okay, so, we've put out quite a few of these articles and AI search is pulling from a lot of them. So maybe we should do a lot of that content. Well, it definitely makes sense to like try and increase the capacity of how much you can create content. And like, there's other strategies we could talk about, such as like doc folder content, maybe creating integration pages, maybe use cases pages, for example, in terms of, how your software can help solve different technical setups, which actually quite a few of our customers, are in very technical verticals, like someone like DevOps, and like, you got to kind of like AI search when people type these very technical queries, like there is a place for creating more content at scale, covering all these different angles. But the problem is though, is that if you consider keywords like this, for example, soon summer alternative. So any good SEO would know that like, if you have 2 pages on the keyword soon summer alternative, Google's going to face a problem of keyword cannibalization. And that basically means that you're going to have a problem where your 2 pages are going to compete and not going to perform in Google. So basically the trap here, which I see a lot of brands falling into, is trying to cover that coverage at all scale. But on the flip side, they're killing basically their organic channel on the SEO front at the same time. And that's where you got to basically be careful and separate out the two. And if you actually look also inside Promptwatch, you look at citations, you'll often see that for a prompt, let's say you search for this prompt here, like, any good Sun Summer alternative, you could add even more details. Say like any good Sun Summer alternative that has integration with X tool, whatever, something a bit more complex, you will actually see that it pulls from content sources on that core topic in mind, such as Sun Summer alternative. And that means that like you can refer back and you can have confidence that actually creating the main page which is going to perform in the Google SERP is actually the best possible way to have your content get cited in AI search and also fuel context basically for these AI search engines. So that's the first trap here, content at scale. And I really think it's the biggest one and it's a real problem right now. In hindsight, Google trying to crack down on it, at least on the Google front, okay? AI search story. Another one then is depth over volume, okay? So it's this idea that like joining back the same idea here basically is like, okay, we're going to create lots of content, etc. Well, how much depth do you actually have to content? Because if LMMs and AI search are similar to crawlers, just like on Google, in hindsight, pages that perform better in a search engine, just like Google or for example, Bing, etc., those pages that have more depth and are more accessible to in general crawlers, etc., they actually are going to perform better in AI search in terms of like basically the types of pages actually influencing those prompts. Because if you look at, once again, inside citations, you'll see for the prompts you're tracking, there's a very strong correlation between the pages in the background and the pages ranking on page 1, basically. So the depth approach we've definitely seen it, having more context in your pages in terms of like who you're good for, what types of customers, what features you have, what are your cons, what are you not good for, and put the stuff which you're not good for. And then, maybe have product-led imagery, or like if you're in other verticals, you can explain the concepts. You can have maybe customer testimonials to back up the ideas. It's all information gain, and that's all the context which AI search also wants to extract out. And of course, we could talk about more details here, such as like structured data, bullet lists, etc. All these elements would definitely be relevant, but this here is a really good start. Okay, so spreading too thin, basically, this is a difficult one. So this is a concept that refers back to the idea which we talked about at the start, where AI search is pulling from so many different sources of content. It's got YouTube, it's got Reddit, it's got SEO website pages, it's got product pages, doc folder content, J2, Capterra. And like for any brand that actually truly harnesses the fact that like, yeah, AI search is pulling from so much more than just SEO, it's a very kind of daunting factor, saying to yourself, well, where do we start? Because there's so much to do. So the question, like, when we onboard a company and they want to work with us, I always ask them questions like, hey, roughly speaking, just how much are you looking to allocate to organic? Because, I'm not going to change my prices, but I want to know like what resources can we actually allocate here? Because there's a lot to do. And depending if you have the budget and the resources to do it, in that case, we should do it. And every person who's running an organic channel right now has to basically face that decision in terms of like saying, hey, we have this budget, what's going to make the most impact? So the way I like to think about it is saying to myself, okay, I want to influence AI search. I know that. But at the same time, other channels can also provide an ROI just by themselves. So for example, YouTube, we know it provides an impact on AI search. What's cool about YouTube, though, is that if you're mid-market, let's say you're a company, well, let's say like Instantly, like a cold email software outreach, Instantly runs a very good YouTube playbook, and they actually drive a lot of their signups through YouTube, which means that YouTube channel isn't just serving the purpose actually of AI search. It's also getting customers. And for our customer here, so Morgan, basically, they drive a lot of signups also thanks to YouTube, which means that channel of activating YouTube has double effect. It's not just influencing AI search, which is great. It is doing that, but it's also driving customers. So I like to think about that exactly the same way for every single channel I'm going to bolt on. Usually the order is pretty simple. It's going to be SEO because indeed there's still a very strong ROI on the SEO front. And it's also the easiest because it's your own website. Then after, I like to look at Reddit, because Reddit these days has a huge leverage in terms of Reddit getting eyeballs basically in Google, influencing AI search. So Reddit's a really interesting one. YouTube, and then move on from there, like third-party listicles, etc. And another way to think about it as well is like, what type of company are you? Because if you're PLG and like mid-market, well, PLG, for example, especially, but like organic sources such as YouTube, etc., usually make a lot of sense. And if you're mid-market, etc., well, in that case, YouTube still can make a lot of sense. But then if you start moving into enterprise, etc., you might say to yourself, well, okay, we're not really going to drive leads maybe from YouTube or Reddit, but in hindsight, it's going to have an influence on AI search. So there's a question to be said, but it's different degrees in terms of importance. So that's his first idea here, is spreading yourself too thin and just really saying to yourself, if we're going to do something, we're going to do it well, and we're going to focus here, and that's going to drive impact. So awesome. So let's move on. Unless Nathan, do you have some questions here? If not, we can move on to the next ideas if you want to.
Yeah, I know. I had two questions for you, or one is more of a statement. And I think a trap that a lot of people fall into is exactly this. I see it quite a lot with people that I work with that are on the platform, or people I interact with on LinkedIn or whatnot. And they're not sure where to start. They either think, okay, I'm just going to overload my website with a bunch of articles that are, they're not going to be of the most depth. They're going to be very thin. Or they'll start doing just a little bit of everything, but they're not getting, as you mentioned earlier in your presentation, they're not getting that reputation of being the right answer that the LLMs are going to pull from on a different one. So I think that's a really good point that you share there, Jules. And then my second thing did you guys have to go through like a testing process or something to figure out with what you showed on your previous slide, with having more depth around each articles, kind of combining your golden keywords and your long tails into more, kind of putting more than just one of them into an article? How did you guys figure that out? What was that process like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're going to talk about the golden keyword strategy actually in a minute, but
Okay.
the idea of depth, basically, Nathan, what is really, I'd say, important to talk about, but like that same idea of like when you look at citations, you look at the real content, which is actually fueling context. It's usually the pages performing the best on the organic SERPs, right? Which that would be on Google or Bing, etc. But it's pages usually performing well. So that's also where I joined back the SEO community to a certain degree, in a sense of saying like, well, do you know what? We've added a ton of depth, a ton of information gain. We've added structured content, etc. That's made the page perform better on the SERPs, because it being better on the SERPs is more accessible to crawlers for scraping. So like that's the first one kind of like, happening in the background. But then after, if you think about depth, etc., well, AI search are very similar also to how Google used to work for like feature snippets, etc. Then they're trying to extract out, and that's where people, they've added these buzzwords like chunking, all the rest of it, which isn't really true, but it's a simple question of like, well, if your page is super, how to say, if it's super ambiguous and the ideas you have inside are very hard to understand, well, that's not a good user experience for users. It's not a good user experience for LMMs. LMMs simply want to have lots of information, really good stuff which is unique, and they want to be able to extract that basically very easily. So the way we got there was simply by saying stuff, well, what are the core principles in terms of like how this is working, and just looking at also what's working on other pages of other prompts and competitors, and just saying to myself like, okay, if this LMM needs to retrieve as much context and doesn't want to get the answer wrong, like what are they looking for basically in general, and just working from there basically. So yeah, we'll talk about a few extra ideas if you want to after Nathan, but is that helpful?
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Okay, awesome, sweet stuff. All right, Glenn. So I'll move on to these extra little ideas over here then. Sorry, so we were here. How we manage areas with yet scared. So this is walking us a little bit through this principle here. So it's actually going to join upon a few of the ideas in terms of like key traps, basically. Okay, so that key trap, which we just talked about before, was spreading yourself too thin across too many queries, right? And too many queries, too many content sources. It's because we talked about this idea that like for a single topic, there's lots of different content sources actually fueling the context for these LMMs. So well, if you just think about this basic maths, basically, is like saying to yourself, okay, when we were doing an SEO strategy, we had like, 300 keywords, really high intent. We want to target them. Well, to target those keywords, probably you only had like a set number of pages. You had your blog posts, you had your calculator pages, maybe your product pages, pretty simple. Now for AI search, though, you've got a bunch of different other sources. You've got maybe 10, 20 Reddit threads, influencing one prompt, one core topic of prompts. You've got maybe 10, 15 YouTube videos. You got like 15, 25 SEO articles. You got the J2 page. Like that's so much, right? So we basically go from this principle is like, okay, once again, 80-20 in terms of like what are the core topics which we really want to make a dent on, because if we have limited budget in terms of like limited focus of resources, let's cover as much ground basically as possible on certain topics in question. So for example, we have like, for Morgan, there are really good tools like an AI planner, for example. So that's a topic, for example, AI planner, we want to appear on more for, okay? So the way we set this up, which we're going to talk about just in a minute, that's why Promptwatch is really helpful, is actually why we decided that one of the main motivating decisions also was this monitor feature, which is really interesting, is like you can basically add lots of prompts basically inside a monitor. It's like a group basically of prompts which you can then track. And then what you're going to do is you're going to see lots of content sources putting through for those core prompts. You're going to be able to take lots of action items, and you'll be able to monitor your performance at the level of that core topic, okay? Because the idea being is that, okay, we want to focus on that 80-20 of the really high intent core topics, which we believe are going to drive leads and revenue for our business, okay? So I'm talking about core topics. We're going to talk about how to find the prompts after, but to find the core topics, that could be digging into your ICP, into sales calls in terms of how people were searching to find you. It can be, if you've got PPC data, reverse engineering, etc. But idea being, define those core topics. Once you've got those core topics, something like AI Planner, then after you're going to find basically all of those prompts, those longer tail variations in terms of like, best AI planner for consultants, best AI planner for architects, like all these different basically like, variations, etc. And you're going to track that basically inside a monitor basically, which is inside Promptwatch, which is really helpful because after what you have to do then is that with your focused efforts in the background, you can be able to improve the results of all of these specific monitors in terms of like core topics by taking focus actions in the background by maybe creating, a blog article on a topic, targeting Reddit threads being pulled through, maybe creating a YouTube video on a topic. And this is how you're going to basically focus, in other words, your efforts. And this is actually how we basically won, with this customer, quite a few AI search terms against bigger competitors like Motion, Todoist, which are pretty big. So idea being is like, that's how you have a focused effort in terms of like moving ground, basically. So so multi-source content assets, just like I said here. So we covered Reddit threads, YouTube videos, blog articles, etc. And that's how you focused your efforts. And that's why in monitors inside Promptwatch, it's a really helpful way of like moving ground basically gradually. Because if you just track all your prompts in general, it just doesn't really help you understand like, okay, at this level here, on this thing here, which we really care about, how are we basically performing, in other words.
Now, if there's one thing I could add on to there, if there's one thing I could add on to there, Jules, I think it's great that you explained how you guys break everything up into monitors, because what we'll see happen quite a few times is that, people will just upload all of their prompts into one, and then they won't take that distinction between them. And then obviously, if you have your branded prompts, how is Morgan suited for this? What is the best things for that? Of course, your visibility is going to be high because the LLM is going to repeat back to you what you're saying. But whenever the real opportunity in those golden keywords is those organic prompts, and that's where you should be focusing your effort. And whenever you see those visibilities and citations go up, that's whenever you're also going to see signups going up. So a very good example.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Because as Nathan just explained, is like, if you just mix everything into one bucket, you've got so many different efforts kind of like screwing up, to be frank, the data, because you've got, as Nathan said, you got branded, maybe another thing you're tracking, like your customer support, whatever it is. They could be like loads of different areas, and that's not really the way to do it. So you want to basically track and just like drill down, basically, in other words. So awesome. So, well, a few KPIs then, which we actually get from these monitors, for example. So, we track AI visibility. What's cool about AI visibility is a bit of a weighted metric, right? It basically accounts for quite a few different parts: citation frequency, the position in the answer, the sentiment, etc. It's like there's a few different parts inside AI visibility score. So that means like it's a good top level metric to just kind of like have a pulse on. And that's usually the first one which we usually start with, because it regroups basically quite a few metrics at that level there. So that's the first one. And of course, we can see this basically across models. We can, filter down, and that's really helpful. You can do that inside Promptwatch, and you can do that, both at the main dashboard level, but also at the monitor level. So you can get quite a bit of value and understand specifically, like, what's happening here. The next one, which we personally like to, actually see as well, is brand mentions. Of course, for, anybody using this, it's not specifically saying like, hey, actually you got mentioned specifically, like real users saw this, but it's a really good thing to actually in hindsight track, because if you're getting more brand mentions, it's, on the historical data, the prompts you're tracking inside an AI search tool, it's basically telling you like, if your brand mentions are going up, well, there's definitely something you're doing in the background which is helping your brand mentions go up. Because before, you might have been being mentioned, across, 100 prompts tracked, you were mentioned 60 times, and like if you're getting mentioned like 70 or 80 times, well, that means your mentions are going up. So by number, that's a good metric to track on. So brand mentions, naturally, also a good metric to track. Then after, you got citations. So citations is actually going to be the content cited, okay? Because I've got another slide just after here, but like a lot of people have to defend the budgets they're putting into organic and AI search, because a lot of, CMOs and sometimes, just the founders, etc., like saying, hey, I'm searching on ChatGPT and we're not there. It's like, what's the strategy? And then after, someone who's in marketing has to come up with a budget and then come up with a strategy to actually, appear inside AI search. And then later on, there'll be a question of like, hey, we're not appearing yet. How come? And very simply said, like, you're gonna have to try and defend basically your strategy. And a really good way to do that is show the soft indicators of success, where if the content you're producing, whether that be on your own website, whether that be blog posts, whether that be on YouTube videos you're creating, on Reddit threads you're targeting, or maybe you're doing, third-party listicle outreach to competitor websites, all of these different elements here, which you're basically working on, if you can show that that content is being used for the prompts which you are tracking basically inside your AI search tool, and you can do that at two levels. Inside Promptwatch, you can do it like a big level. You can see all citations. If not, you can drill down into individual monitors. You can say, well, for this topic here, you can see like, we cared about this. We've targeted all these content sources. They're being pulled through, etc. Now, that is going to create confidence basically for other stakeholders for them to understand, like, okay, cool, we've spent budget, maybe we're not getting the results specifically we intended, but at least we can see we're on track, because this content which we're focusing on is the content being used by AI search, which means technically what more could we be doing? It's just a question of doing more of it. So citations and like the content reverse engineering is a really important part basically to have a look at. So yeah, any questions now on Nathan, or what is any other actually metrics you would potentially add actually?
Yeah, no. So I have two for you. One, do you guys split the citations by on-site and off-site? How do you guys report on that?
That's actually a good question, actually. Maybe that is something which we should be doing more of, actually. We don't actually currently split it up. And I'm guessing when you say like, offsite, you just have everything which isn't on your own
Exactly. So
content,
anything that
right? So
might be
like
coming
website.
from a
Yeah,
YouTube channel that's not owned by the company, or a Reddit page that you're not currently moderating, or something
mm,
like that. If you guys
yeah.
split that up.
We haven't actually split up, but that'd be a good thing to do. I definitely think that would be an area to level up in terms of saying like, hey, well, this is the own content and this is what's
Yeah.
exterior to us. Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. But no, actually, we don't actually currently do that.
And then the second thing, because yeah, I mean, I also manage our own AI search optimization here at Promptwatch, using Promptwatch. And the fourth KPI that I focus on and I share with the rest of the team is also the citation crawlers. So I think you might have something about this
Yeah,
later in the doc, so I don't want to spoil anything. But if you connect your
definitely.
CDN to Promptwatch, then you're able to see whenever all of the agentic traffic from the different LLMs are on your site, and we steer for the citation agents from ChatGPT, Claude, and the others. And that's another way where we show the content that we're working on is actually being used in the conversations, and then we see those turn into citations, and then that's whenever we see the full picture, just like you're describing, Jules. So yeah, no, I think these
Yeah,
are great
definitely.
KPIs.
We could definitely talk about crawl logs, because that's definitely an important metric, as you said, Nathan. And actually, one
Yeah.
slide here, which I've actually forgotten to add, but is actually super important, is AI visitor analytics in terms of like just referred sessions coming from ChatGPT or other models, etc. As much as I would say that was a KPI which we didn't maybe put forwards as much beforehand. Recently, for example, like, I think it was it last week or 2 weeks ago, ChatGPT added the blue links, right, in terms of like citing brands a bit more prominently. And like on a few customers, they've had like crazy increases. Like some of them actually a few thousand extra clicks, basically like
Oh
crazy numbers
wow.
just from ChatGPT. So it just goes to show that like now basically that metric is suddenly, because of ChatGPT, before, we're talking like, 10, 100 clicks max, basically, etc. Now it's like,
It's,
oh, okay, there's a few hundred clicks here. So that is actually becoming actually more increasingly a metric. And it's actually interesting, but that's also got customers a lot more excited about AI search. Like, oh, wow, wait a minute, this like referring us a lot more visits now. So that's interesting. And see if ChatGPT keep that feature. But like, yeah, AI visitor analytics in terms of referred sessions, which is coming from J4, really interesting metric also to pull through, in a word. So really good. So, well, this customer basic success story, which we basically use here across the whole channel, it just basically to prove the impact basically of this whole strategy when it comes together. So, Jim is a very good operator in JTM, and he knew that basically when we come together for this strategy, he knew it was the way to go. And it just shows that like if you can actually get buy-in from your team and whoever's basically managing the budget, but if you can push multi-channel, that really is going to prove the best possible benefits. It is hard, and I will basically say that it is hard to do this. Like that is the best possible way you could execute, and it is hard to do so, but if you can do it, that's really when you get your best possible results. And this basically Morgan kind of like stands for the results, so definitely a really good way of doing stuff. Awesome. So Nathan, you asked me like, hey, what was some features which are missing? So crawl logs was basically definitely one of them. So crawl logs, which is really interesting, is that it helps you understand okay, how is this website actually being used? Because same story, if you're an agency, if you're a freelancer, you're gonna have to defend how is the website being used, and your customers are going to ask this question. If you're in-house, your leadership team is also going to want to understand like how is our website actually being used today. And which pages should we potentially update, which pages should we put more of a focus on, etc. So crawl logs really helps us connect the dots basically. So, crawl logs basically just helps understand, which pages of your website LMMs visited and how many times. And so that's also a metric which we basically use. And often as well, it's for us, it's the first level of justification of maybe putting a bigger focus on a certain type of page, because a customer, sometimes they might say, hey, well, I don't believe that LMMs are actually using these pages, like they're using something else. But if you can just show them and say, hey, look, the data is very different. They actually are using, maybe it's like the doc folder content. Maybe you're like in a technical vertical if you're in SaaS. But like, you might be able to justify saying, hey, we actually need to put more effort here into this type of folder. And crawl logs feature, just like here in Promptwatch, can really basically help you achieve that. And that's a really interesting feature to use. So that's crawl logs.
Yeah, perfect.
Nice. So go for it, Nathan.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, yeah, no, very well explained.
Sorry, I forget a question. Okay, awesome. So we had a question here: how's Promptwatch help Scalerrs? So, one of our core services for Scalerrs is actually Reddit. So Reddit is a really big portion of what we do. So idea being is like, most of our customers, once again, all they care about is AI search and organic in terms of like getting more visibility from Google, which because Reddit is ranking in Google, so there's eyeballs. But those are the two benefits, which means that, when we are trying to do Reddit work, we are basically starting with reverse engineering from our golden keywords, which basically Reddit threads are influencing those golden keywords. And then from those, we're then targeting basically these Reddit threads. So our Reddit team basically often looks at the monitors, looks at which Reddit threads are being pulled through. And then from that, after we target these conversations. Of course, there's a lot more that goes into it in terms of saying to yourself, is the Reddit conversation still open for discussion? Is it maybe a little bit sour? Is it gone a certain way? Are you actually going to be able to provide value? There's more that goes into it, but definitely, understanding, first of all, which Reddit threads actually matter. So reverse engineering, really helpful. As I've talked about, C-suite confidence, like, anybody which is in-house or an inner agency is going to have to defend a certain point budget. And you're going to have to defend saying, hey, well, we should keep doing this strategy, even though the results aren't there yet, because look, the leading indicators of success are happening. So C-suite confidence, I think, is a really important thing and definitely should be used more. And in validating new strategies. So for example, we've recently, the last week or so, we've just basically released this new part of our service where we're actually repurposing the content which we've done hard effort basically on the blog side, so like long format written content that is owned on the website of the company, and we're putting that now into a LinkedIn format, and we're also putting it into a Medium. So actually Promptwatch helped us discover this, because we could see inside the citations of like what was the type of content being used. We could see LinkedIn posts rising and also Medium. So we're just saying to ourselves like, okay, we've put so much effort to actually write this this content for our website. Like, how about we just now go and put it on LinkedIn, go and put it on Medium? We've already done the heavy lift. So let's just go a step further. So, that's a good way also, which Promptwatch has really helped us kind of like validate those new strategies by, once again, just having more data available at hand and seeing what actually matters basically for our vertical and the prompts we're tracking. And I think that like any, service provider which is offering services like SEO, etc., or even like an in-house team, really needs to have this agility in front of them in terms of saying to themselves like, okay, what really matters to us today? How can we pivot our strategy? How can we improve it, etc.? And once again, it's not just SEO, unfortunately. So there's a few stuff to think about. And there we go. So we've got some last advice here to, if you're starting out then. So, my advice here is actually going to join a few points basically from the start, but I like to think about this kind of like this pyramid, in other words, is like, which channels, first of all, have the most impact? That's the one which we talked about before in terms of like the influence on AI search, and at the same time as well, which ones can also stand alone, drive their own leads, right? So SEO can drive its own leads, a proven channel. Reddit now is emerging. I think it was Trigger5 did a study, but like there's a lot of B2B buyers these days trusting Reddit, for example, more than they're trusting even LinkedIn, etc., which means, or even J2. So it means that like, people are actually trusting Reddit conversations as like a buy decision and pushing them down the funnel, which means you can not only influence AI search thanks to Reddit, you can also drive leads, which is 100% the case for a lot of our customers when you look at the sign up flow and like, where do you hear about us field? So that's an interesting thing. YouTube is the same story we talked about as well. It can drive leads. So that's the first part. It's like, okay, what can basically also drive leads on top of just having an AI search impact? And then the second thing is that conversation you were saying before, Nathan, with like, owned content versus not owned. Like, certain sources of content are going to ask you to have permission, right? In terms of if you want to go and improve your J2 results, like you're going to have to reach out to your customers and try and like say, hey, do you know, would you like to leave a review, etc. Like that takes effort. It's not just your own voluntary effort of spending some time to get that review. It actually depends on another person, an individual. But you, for example, creating your own page on your website, which then performs and influences AI search, that's only up to you. It's for you to put in the work. For you to create a YouTube video and basically get that to perform and influence AI search, same story. There's no permission involved. So that's the next way I like to think about these channels, is saying to myself, okay, the barrier to entry in terms of trying to influence them, let's just start with the stuff which makes the most sense and is the easiest. So I would ask myself these two questions. First of all, is like, okay, which ones I control very easily, and in which ones also can actually drive leads. And to be frank, those two points could probably be inverse because they're just as important basically one as the other. So there's a small pyramid here which kind of like regroups the three different sources, but that's the way I like to think about it. So let's have a look. Okay, we've got a last little one here where we see the biggest shakeup coming next. Okay, so this is actually very interesting. So we're talking to a lot more bigger customers, and I would say like even kind of like unicorn level for full transparency, and like there's a very big shift right now in terms of a lot of more customers are trying to pick up YouTube. And I also have a few contacts which are in contact with quite a few of like, bigger customers as well. And they are trying to double down on YouTube. And it's interesting. It's not because it's unfortunate, but it's not from the interest of saying to themselves, hey, we're going to build a community on YouTube, etc. It's because now it's pretty clear to them. They're seeing YouTube inside the AI search results on Google, like appearing inside the AI overview. And they're also seeing it being pulled through in sources inside the prompts they're tracking. So for me, YouTube basically is going to be on the rise. A lot more companies are going to start investing into it. And I would also say that I think I think it's going to become maybe a little bit more. I'm curious to see how people are going to kind of like execute it. There's definitely a barrier to entry because it takes a lot more effort basically to create YouTube, but a lot more companies are going to invest into it. And I think also potentially, but I think models and Google potentially as well will rely more and more heavily potentially on YouTube as a source because it falls under that category of UGC and also hard to create content where maybe the barrier to entry on, written content is lower because of AI tools, etc. But maybe the barrier to entry of creating YouTube video is higher, which means the authenticity and that layer of like the weighted signal, which these LLMs give to the actual domain, is going to be high. So for me, YouTube is going to be a rising source. I'm going to see more brands focusing on it. And there we go. Sorry, so that's an old slide, that one. There you go, Nathan. So there you go. So if you've got any questions, we can dive in from there.
Yeah, of course. No, Jules, I completely agree with you on the YouTube prediction. I think there's going to be a lot more happening there. I did see a few questions coming in. We had one coming in where somebody was asking, how do you come to the golden keywords?
Okay, that's a really good question. So how do we define in that small number of very high priority keywords? Okay, so first part answer of that is the number. Personally, depending on the scale of your resources, we like to define usually 20 to 30 topics. Okay, so really high intent topics. How to find them would be one, you can cross-reference that with your SEO strategy. If you've already identified that on your SEO strategy, in the sense of like you have like some really high priority keywords which you want to target. Let's we have the example here of like Morgan, but maybe we can use the example of Promptwatch, for example, who we're doing the webinar with. So Promptwatch would probably want to rank for the keyword best GEO tool. Okay, so best GEO tool would be one golden keyword. Then after they would take another keyword, such as maybe best ChatGPT SEO tool. Okay, even though it's quite close keyword, but it's probably got different intents. But if you were to look after probably the all the sources, they're going to pull from individual sources around those topics. But what Promptwatch would want to do is like define all of those really high important category keywords, which like they believe, which customers are going to be searching for, and that's going to drive the best possible lead. So they might have that from their SEO strategy, they might have that from their ICP understanding, and maybe as well if a company is running ads, etc., they might have data as well to kind of say like, okay, these are the really high priority ones. But if you want to like define a number, 20 to 30, and in the last tip as well, I'd say is that the category of keywords I personally wouldn't put anything informational. I would only put bottom funnel terms, because that's the nature of AI search, where like we want to get a brand recommendation, right? So I would put bottom of funnel, such as like best X keywords, alternative, so alternative to competitor A. I would put versus keywords, such as like competitor A versus competitor B alternatives. And then I would put maybe like if it is like a job to be done, it's something where the job to be done straight away leads to my brand. So I wouldn't search something though very top of funnel, such as like, what to do if I have an insurance claim. If I was in insurance, for example, that's just going to give you like an informational result. I wouldn't really track that inside AI search. I would track bottom of funnel. Hopefully that answered the question. If you have any extra questions, happy to help out again.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Jules. Thank you. No, but I think we're about out of time here, unfortunately. But we can follow up if anybody has. No. But if anybody has any additional questions for Jules or myself, you can reach us on LinkedIn. Shoot us both an email.
Yeah.
Absolutely not a problem.
Very happy to help out.
Thank you, Jules.
All right, awesome. Thanks for having me on, Nathan, and Nathan again.
Yep.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.